In a remote castle on the outskirts of Kushan, a group of warriors moved through its dimly lit halls. One of them muttered that perhaps their information had been wrong. His companion quickly replied that the source was Lord Cassius himself, and therefore the information had to be correct. Another man voiced his unease, saying that he found it strange there were no magical beasts around, not even an insect. His companion explained that perhaps the rumor of Lord Nagi's arrival had spread, frightening the creatures away. The man agreed, saying that such a possibility made perfect sense. As they roamed further, they stumbled upon an unfamiliar chamber. One of them asked if it was old, noting it wasn't marked on the map. Another pointed toward an exit and a stairway climbing upward. A soldier suggested sending someone to scout the suspicious area. This remark enraged Lord Nagi, who snapped that the upper floor was assigned to the Ilnian gang. With a sharp gesture, he pointed to their true destination and declared they would move there at once. He then ordered the man who had made the suggestion to lead the way. The soldier exclaimed that he was surprised by such an order, but Nagi barked the command again with greater anger, asking if he had to repeat himself. The man obeyed and stepped ahead, soon reporting that the place was utterly empty. His words had barely left his mouth when fierce beasts appeared without warning. They looked like wolves, but their eyes glowed red with malice as they launched forward. The pack closed in on Nagi and his group, their sudden charge striking terror in the Lord's eyes. The men's situation worsened as every door and exit slammed shut, trapping them. Panic spread, and one warrior cried out in despair, demanding to know what they should do. Nagi rebuked him harshly, declaring that if they wanted to survive, they had no choice but to fight. He shouted at his men, calling them fools, and ordered them to face the beasts head-on and at least buy him time to escape. A brutal battle erupted. The warriors fell one after another, ripped apart by sharp fangs. Nagi himself nearly met his end when a beast lunged at him, but at the last moment, another blade struck it down. A new figure appeared, mocking Nagi as he asked if he considered himself some damsel in distress. The shaken lord looked up to see Lord Ranson, and exclaimed that his timing was perfect. With calm confidence, Ranson told him to watch closely. Then, with the grace and precision of a swordmaster, he leapt into action. His blade gleamed as he sliced through a beast's neck, severing it in a single strike. The rest of the pack hurled themselves at him, but he cut them down one after another in the blink of an eye. When the last corpse hit the floor, silence filled the chamber. The surviving men stared in awe. Ranson stood tall among the bodies. Nagi exclaimed that Lord Ranson's power was beyond description, saying that swordmasters were truly in a class of their own. Watching him, Nagi wondered aloud what reward Count Cassius might bestow upon Ranson for such a feat. Then, with bitterness, he remarked that he could have handled everything by himself. Ranson answered coldly that Nagi's talent for words was impressive, but his swordsmanship was pathetic. He advised him to train harder if he ever wished to be strong. Nagi replied with gritted teeth and malice in his eyes, vowing that he would. The scene shifted to the ruins of Ilnian within Kushan. There, a man greeted Ranson and asked why he had arrived so late. Ranson apologized, saying that unforeseen matters had delayed him. The man spoke with worry, telling him that Count Cassius had already come and that the situation was dire. When Ranson asked what had happened, the man explained that the Count had taken the children and left behind a scroll. Ranson unrolled it to find an order written within, the command to kill someone named Delkachu. When the man heard the name, he gasped in shock. The target was none other than Blood Count Delkachu, a true-blood vampire and a swordmaster, ruler of Kasho. While Kushan fell under the control of Count Cassius, Kasho lay under Delkachu's iron grip, and the two lords remained in constant opposition. Because of this rivalry, Ranson and his companions were forced to carry out Cassius's dirty work to earn his support. The man cursed their fate, saying that all Lord Ranson had ever wanted was to flee with the children and live peacefully. He damned the Count to whom he had given nearly 10 years of loyalty. Then, in desperation, he tried to stop Ranson, reminding him that Delkachu was a true-blood vampire. Ranson answered firmly that he had no reason to live without his siblings, the children. The man exclaimed that Ranson had only just returned, and asked where he thought he was going in such a state. But Ranson insisted he would depart immediately, because the children had been taken. The man warned him gravely that Delkachu commanded countless vampires, many of them experts as strong or stronger than Ranson himself. Yet Ranson declared that this was an order for Lord Bursun. After a long moment of hesitation, Bursun finally gave his reluctant consent. Ranson explained that he wanted Lord Bursun to remain behind and care for their siblings. With a confident smile, he promised that he would surely return victorious and set everything right. As Ranson and his group departed, Bursun clenched his fist tightly, deciding within himself that this was one order he could not obey. The scene then shifted back in time, to March 11th of the continental year 1337, in the Vanroa kingdom. There, the Queen of Vanroa commanded the Knight Commander Bursun to take young Ranson and escape, while she would stay to defend the royal palace. Bursun refused at first, declaring that he would remain to protect her until the end. But the Queen insisted firmly, saying that his duty was not to her, but to the bloodline of Vanroa. Bound by her authority and conviction, Bursun could not defy her request. The Queen turned to her son, the second prince, and told him to listen carefully. She urged him to survive no matter what, reminding him that the destiny of Vanroa's women had always been to preserve the royal bloodline for generations to come, and now he too carried the same duty. The young prince wept and refused to flee alone. His mother placed a necklace around his neck, promising that it would protect him. She begged him to revive the Vanroa royal family one day. Moved by her sacrifice, Bursun swore to serve the prince with his life. He remembered the scene bitterly, the capital burning, the king and queen slain, and himself forced to escape with the second prince in his arms. That day, the prince turned 13. He had watched his parents and elder brother die, and could only stare silently at the flames rising into the night sky. Thus, the 500-year-old kingdom of Vanroa fell. Bursun recalled how they evaded the Empire's soldiers, following the escape route with about 20 knights, the prince, and the last surviving heirs of a marquis family. By April 1st, they had crossed the Moxum border and stowed away on a ship during a raging storm bound from Gloryland to Roverland. On August 23rd of that same year, they arrived in Roverland, a haven for criminals and exiles. 2 months later, in Kushan, Bursun counted their losses. Many knights had perished on the way, leaving only 12 survivors, himself among them. He reminded himself that his duty was to protect His Highness the Second Prince Ranson, now the only legitimate heir, along with the scattered heirs of dukes, marquises, and counts. He vowed to guard them at any cost, even through disgrace and hardship. The scene shifted to Kashu, within the castle of Blood Count Delkachu. Bursun fought desperately, muttering to himself to endure, praying that His Highness Ranson was safe. He staggered into the dark throne room, where he found the corpses of Ranson's companions strewn across the floor. At the center stood Delkachu, bloodied, with a sword impaled in his chest. Bursun rushed forward, crying out for Ranson, and found him gravely wounded. With a faint smile, Ranson whispered that it was over. Bursun was shaken, asking himself if the royal line of Vanroa, all their dreams of renewal, and every sacrifice they had made would end here. He refused to accept it, vowing aloud that it could not end like this. Through grief, Bursun lifted the broken prince into his arms. He resolved to save him, no matter the cost. 3 years later, the scene returned to the ruins of Ilnian in Kushan. The place was quiet, and children played cheerfully. Bursun called out to Ranson, who was on the roof of a house, repairing it. Ranson felt joy seeing Bursun safe. As he descended the ladder, his foot slipped and he tumbled down. Bursun rushed over in alarm, asking if he was hurt. Ranson reassured him and asked what the count had said. Bursun answered that the reply was the same as always. They were to wait another month. Ranson accepted calmly, saying they could endure for now and would ask again later. Bursun scolded him for doing such heavy work. Ranson replied that he could not burden the children with it. Bursun countered that those children were no longer small, but Ranson insisted he would protect them no matter how old they grew. Bursun sighed, addressed him as Elric, and said he knew exactly what Ranson would repeat. Ranson guessed correctly, saying that Bursun was about to mention an elixir, which Bursun confirmed bitterly. The elixir, a legendary potion of life, was said to have been discovered in the Ilnian dungeon 2 centuries ago, an ancient miracle beyond modern magic. Ranson dismissed it as nothing more than an old tale. He asked what was wrong with Bursun, claiming that he lived without great difficulty. Seeing his indifference, Bursun let the matter drop but admitted quietly that miracles like the one from the past rarely happen twice. Suddenly, children came running toward them in panic, shouting, "Master!" and warning him of danger. Ranson raised his armored arm just in time to block a wooden plank hurtling toward him. Turning back with a smile, he told them that he had only just finished fixing the roof and did not want it damaged again. He then approached one of the boys, handed him the wooden sword, and advised him never to let it slip from his grasp. The boy protested that he had been holding it tightly. Ranson corrected him, explaining that grip alone was not enough. He must use his legs to support his stance, spreading his weight through his whole body. He told the boy to picture his opponent clearly in his mind. As he demonstrated, memories surged within him, vivid, bloody flashes of his battle against Count Delcachu. The Count struck with a crushing blow, but Ranson managed to block it. In that moment, he remembered how having someone to protect had always given him strength, and he declared within himself that he could not die, for there were still lives depending on him. The Count stepped in with lethal speed, and with a single decisive move, severed Ranson's arm. Ranson did not retreat. Ignoring the searing pain, he lunged forward and aimed a strike at the Count's neck. At the peak of this memory, his body reacted on instinct. His blade crashed down on the wooden training dummy before him, splitting it clean in half. Bursun and the children stared in stunned silence. Bursun muttered Ranson's name under his breath, while one of the children shouted that the master had broken the wooden horse. Ranson blinked as though waking from a trance, then apologized, saying that he had only meant to demonstrate the technique and had accidentally used too much force. He promised them he would repair the dummy later. At that moment, another child came running in, breathless with fear, shouting for Master Ranson and insisting that something terrible had happened. He explained that it concerned Daisy and Cyclone. Ranson's expression hardened instantly. A grim sense of foreboding swept over him. Without hesitation, he rushed toward one of the buildings, noting that the heavy stench of blood in the air was far too strong for a simple quarrel among children. He burst inside, calling their names, only to find a young man and a girl locked in a vicious duel with real blades. The red-haired girl was Daisy of the Ilnian family. Her opponent, the blue-haired youth, was Cyclone, also of the same bloodline. Before Ranson could intervene, Nagi, subordinate to Count Cassius, appeared, greeting him with a mocking tone and remarking on how long he had been absent. Ranson demanded sharply to know what was happening. Nagi, wearing a strained smile, explained that he was merely conducting an interview. Ranson repeated the word with disbelief. Nagi elaborated that he was testing Daisy and Cyclone, and that if they displayed promise, he intended to take them as his personal followers. He ordered the two youths to step aside. Ranson's anger flared. He asked Nagi who he thought he was to presume he could taint noble blood with his own. Nagi sneered and retorted that becoming his followers, even at the lowest rank, would be far better than remaining under a broken man who had lost his limbs. Ranson demanded to know if Count Cassius had sanctioned this. Nagi scoffed, saying that Ranson failed to understand, and that the Count was far too busy to concern himself with every minor matter. Ranson deduced that Nagi had come here of his own accord, knowing this place belonged to their family. Nagi confirmed it with no shame, and even added that rumors claimed the mighty Swordmaster Ranson had lost his limbs protecting nothing more than a pack of children. Ranson's fury deepened at such words. Nagi then asked slyly whether Ranson truly believed he could protect anyone in his current state. Ranson issued a grave warning, telling him not to lay a finger on the children and to leave quietly, or he would die by Ranson's hand. Nagi only smiled in disbelief, clearly doubting he could act on such a threat. Before Nagi could finish his next remark, Ranson struck first, launching a sudden and swift attack. Nagi's men intercepted the blow, locking blades with him, and were stunned by the strength behind it. They muttered that his power measured at least the level of a low-ranked expert. Ranson thought grimly that they were no match for him, and told them never to underestimate a swordmaster. He unleashed a devastating strike, cutting down Nagi's men in an instant. Nagi clapped slowly, impressed. He said that Ranson was still the same and declared mockingly that he was amazing, calling him brother. Ranson replied that the younger generation no longer seemed to know fear. Nagi urged him not to be too harsh, insisting that his opponent was only a rookie. Ranson realized from Nagi's expression that he still harbored an old grudge against him. Nagi denied it at first, but his face soon twisted with darkness as a sinister, bloody aura engulfed him. He prepared himself for battle. Ranson understood he could not drag the fight out, not in his condition. He resolved to finish it in a single strike. With blinding speed, he launched another surprise attack, convinced he had him. But Nagi blocked it effortlessly, using only the aura around his body. The impact shattered Ranson's sword. Nagi looked down at him with contempt and asked why he appeared so pathetic, revealing with cruel satisfaction that Ranson's core had been completely destroyed. Ranson froze in shock. Nagi continued his taunts, asking if Ranson truly believed he could ever reach the higher ranks, and said that this was why he had always stressed the importance of becoming one of the Bloodkin. Ranson glanced around in desperation, wondering frantically what he should do now. Nagi cast a terrifying glare at Daisy and Cyclone, his eyes burning with malice as the two children trembled before him. He threatened them coldly, asking if he should kill them one by one. Ranson, realizing that a fight to the death was now unavoidable, resolved that at the very least, he had to protect the children. He pleaded with Nagi to end it here, reminding him that there were children present who should not be forced to witness such brutality. Nagi threw his head back and laughed mockingly, saying with cruel delight that Swordmaster Ranson was actually begging him. Ranson admitted he would not deny it. He then lowered his sword, letting it fall to the ground, and sank to his knees. Nagi sneered that it would not be that simple, declaring that he needed to warm his body first. He then began his merciless assault. His fists crashed into Ranson's face again and again, knocking him to the ground. A powerful kick struck him across the ribs, leaving him broken and bleeding. Nagi pressed his boot against the fallen warrior, crushing him into the dirt as Ranson, barely conscious, begged him weakly to stop and muttered apologies. After a pause, Nagi smiled with mock kindness. He said that he was a soft-hearted man after all, and that this beating was enough for today. With that, he turned to leave, promising them coldly that he would return tomorrow. As silence fell, one of the children gazed at their battered master and asked in despair what they were going to do now. Ranson forced a faint smile and reassured them that it was all right, because he had managed to protect them. Later, he gathered Daisy and Cyclone and asked why they had done such a thing, and if they truly wished to become Nagi's kin. Cyclone bowed his head and apologized, but Daisy said nothing. Her red eyes blazed with defiance as she stood silently. At last, she muttered a curse under her breath. Ranson turned to her in shock and asked what she had just said. Daisy snapped back, demanding to know what was stopping her from becoming a subordinate of Count Cassius. She reminded him bitterly that he himself had once served Cassius. Ranson's voice rose with anger as he asked if she really did not understand the reason. He explained that Cassius was a man driven by greed, who sought to become a vampire at any cost. Because of him, their comrades and families had been slaughtered. He gestured to his prosthetic limbs, saying that Cassius was the reason he had ended up like this. He demanded to know if Daisy still intended to follow such a man just for the sake of living by sucking blood. Daisy burst into furious tears and screamed that it was none of his business. She shouted at him, asking if he thought he was her father. Through sobs and anger, she declared that her life was hers to decide, and ordered him to stop meddling in other people's affairs and just worry about his own worthless existence. Having vented her rage, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Cyclone hurried after her but then turned back to Ranson, saying softly that Daisy had not truly meant what she said. He added that he understood kneeling in such a situation required enormous courage. He observed that his master must be in great pain, and offered to fetch a healing potion from Uncle Balshan. Ranson managed a faint smile and thanked him. At that moment, Balshan burst into the room in a panic, asking if Ranson was all right. He explained that a child named Lena had come to him, saying that Daisy told her Ranson had fought with Nagi and been injured. She had run to Balshan for help. Realizing she had exposed Daisy's actions, Lena cried out that she would be in terrible trouble if Daisy discovered what she had done. Balshan confirmed that Daisy was indeed responsible. Ranson laughed weakly at the situation and thanked them all for their concern. Balshan handed him the healing potion, and Ranson accepted it quietly, whispering thanks in Daisy's name. Later that night, seated alone, he was seized by a violent cough. He stared at his blood-stained prosthetic hand inside. He thought bitterly that if his core had remained intact, someone like Nagi would never have been a threat to him. But he quickly forced the thought away, reminding himself that what mattered now was protecting the children. Still, unease gnawed at him as he considered Nagi's promise to return the next day. In the end, he admitted to himself that he might have no choice but to use that thing. He drew out the necklace of the Barua royal family and turned it in his hand, considering selling it to raise the means to protect the children. Treasures like the royal seal were too dangerous, for the Empire would surely track them, leaving the necklace as his only option. His gaze then fell upon the asterisk Book of Fate, and he wondered why such a strange artifact was considered a royal treasure. He opened it and read. The passage spoke of an event dated March 17, 4673, of the Rosarius calendar. A vow taken within a secret church of a cult. To his shock, Ranson realized he could understand the ancient script written within. Suddenly, the book erupted in a powerful light, and the mark of the holy star blazed across its surface. In the blink of an eye, Ranson vanished from his room. He found himself running through a dark corridor, bewildered, asking how this could be when moments ago he had been reading quietly. But he quickly realized this was no illusion, it was real. He recognized the setting. The Ilnian dungeon. Yet here it appeared pristine, as if newly built. Ahead of him stood a group of robed figures identical to the one he now wore. Confused, he wondered who they were. He heard one of them shout about an intruder in the church, and the leader commanded them to secure the elixir first. The word struck Ranson like thunder. Elixir. He connected the signs, the renewed dungeon, the ancient date recorded in the book, and the legend that the elixir had first been discovered here. A staggering conclusion rose in his mind. He had been thrown back in time, 10,000 years into the past. The cult's leader confirmed aloud that the elixir was safe. Ranson's heart raced as he thought that with it, he could reclaim everything he had lost. Sensing 12 figures in the vicinity, he briefly considered cutting them down to seize the treasure immediately. But the leader gave orders. The intruder was to be hunted in pairs before the offering could begin. He called names, and then ordered one, Serwis, to join Ranson in covering the northern passage. Ranson froze, stunned that they had addressed him by that name. He speculated that they mistook him for a comrade of the past, and reasoned that the magic of the Holy Star had twisted events this way. He began to wonder at the true nature of the asterisk Book of Fate. Serwis called out, asking why he was standing there idle, and urged him to move. Ranson decided it was wiser, for now, to play along, gather what knowledge he could, and wait for the right opportunity. He followed Serwis into the shadowed halls. As they advanced, they came across a golden-haired woman. Moments later, a figure with yellow hair and a glowing purple blade ambushed them. The intruder's strike cut Serwis in half in an instant. Ranson clashed blades with the attacker, noticing a strange transparent flash each time their swords met. His own weapon splintered with every exchange, and he observed the same damage inflicted upon the enemy's blade. He thought to himself that this power was beyond ordinary sword aura. Something far stranger was at play. The idea came to him that perhaps he should test this phenomenon for himself. Nearby, he spotted frightened children cowering in the shadows. Behind the yellow-haired attacker, they trembled in terror. The figure revealed herself as a blonde knightess, stepping protectively before the children. She accused Ranson of siding with cultists who kidnapped innocents, shouting that he meant to use them as living sacrifices. Her words struck him deeply, and for a moment, memories of his own children and their laughter flooded his mind. The remaining cult members rushed into the chamber, feigning ignorance and asking whether Serwis had been killed by the intruder. Before they could finish their words, Ranson struck, cutting them down with a single decisive blow. The blonde knightess stared at him in shock. Ranson turned to her and declared that they were on the same side, and that they must fight together. Two more cult members rushed into the chamber, finding the corpses of their fallen comrades. One of them shouted for the other to hurry and assist Ranson, clearly believing him to still be an ally. Without hesitation, Ranson pivoted and cut the man down, his blade severing his head in a single motion. The surviving cultist froze in horror, pointing at him and crying out that he was a traitor, before collapsing lifeless beside the others. Ranson stood calmly among the bodies and told the blonde knightess that thanks to her staged fight earlier, it had been easy for him to strike them down. She looked at him in confusion and explained that she had not staged anything at all. He had been attacking her recklessly, forcing her to defend herself. Ranson told her bluntly to continue aiding him in the same way regardless. At that moment, the cult leader, Celtic, entered the chamber. His gaze fell on the scene of carnage, and he remarked that Ranson's character was becoming more and more difficult to understand. With a twisted grin, he asked him directly if he had betrayed them. Celtic went on to say that the 5 souls who had died with grief from betrayal were not wasted. and that betrayal itself contained a chaos that would please their master. He added that the soul of the noble knightess would be even more rewarding. The knightess's expression darkened as she realized she was standing before an advanced expert-level opponent. Regret washed over her. She should have called for reinforcements before coming here. She knew well enough that as a mid-level expert, facing someone like Celtic alone was impossible. Still, she decided to strike first, hoping to create an opening for Ranson. She charged with fierce determination, and their blades clashed violently. Celtic met her with ease, blocking her strike and countering with a vicious kick that sent her sprawling across the floor. She sprang up and lunged again, but he slipped past her blow effortlessly. His lips curled in a sinister smile as he raised his weapon for another strike. She trembled at the realization of his overwhelming strength. At that crucial moment, Ranson appeared, his body surrounded by a glowing blue aura. Moving with a sudden burst of speed, he unleashed his storm technique and brought his sword slashing across Celtic's neck. Celtic staggered, groaning in pain, but he did not fall. Instead, a necklace at his throat glowed brightly, absorbing the fatal force. He touched the artifact woven into his robes and sneered, admitting to himself that he would have been slain without it. The battle erupted in full force. Celtic's sword burned with a crimson aura, striking again and again, while Ranson countered with his azure energy. Their clash was relentless, yet Ranson began to falter, realizing grimly that Celtic's movements were unpredictable. He wondered how the knightess had managed to withstand him for as long as she had. Seizing a chance, the blonde knightess reappeared from behind and launched a desperate surprise attack. Celtic blocked her easily, sending sparks flying. She cried out to Ranson in frustration, asking what he was doing, demanding to know why his colored aura seemed so weak despite its strange and unpredictable flow. Celtic laughed mockingly, saying that a colored aura meant nothing by itself. He called Ranson a novice swordsman, one who could not even grasp the heart of the sword. His next attack cut deep, and the knightess screamed in agony. Celtic turned his eyes back to Ranson, dark and gleaming with malice, bidding him farewell as he prepared to strike the killing blow. The insult ignited a fury deep within Ranson. He remembered his days under Count Cassius, the battles that had earned him the title of Swordmaster, a weapon deemed of strategic value. Blood ran from his lips, but his eyes burned with defiance. He challenged Celtic to see whether the power he carried was truly that of a novice. With that, Ranson unleashed a new technique, Aura Thread. Celtic's eyes widened in disbelief as he realized Ranson's power had transformed completely. Thin, shimmering threads of blue aura extended from Ranson's blade, weaving together in a deadly pattern. Ranson muttered under his breath, mocking the idea that he could not read the heart of the sword. The threads danced in intricate movements, slicing through Celtic's defenses. The cult leader struggled, but the fine strands cut deeper and deeper until, with one final stroke, they severed his head clean from his shoulders. Celtic's body collapsed heavily to the ground, lifeless, as silence fell over the chamber. Ranson fell to the ground, blood pouring from his mouth as his body trembled. The blonde knightess, still reeling from the battle, sat frozen in shock and demanded to know who he truly was. But Ranson, gasping for breath and too weak to waste words, ignored her. With unsteady movements, he crawled towards Celtic's corpse, driven by a single desperate hope. Reaching the body, he found what he sought, a small box hidden beneath the folds of the cult leader's robe. With shaking hands, he opened it and revealed the elixir. A triumphant smile spread across his bloodied face as he declared that he had finally found it. The knightess, watching in confusion, asked what he was doing, but before he could drink it all, Ranson's strength failed him. He collapsed, the half-emptied elixir slipping from his grasp, leaving the knightess staring at him in bewilderment and awe. An old pocket watch slipped from his cloak, sinking into a pool of water with a muted splash, the signal that his journey into the distant past had ended. In the present, Daisy wandered restlessly, racked with regret. She whispered to herself, calling Ranson her brother, and asked Bersun if he had seen him. She confessed desperately that she needed to apologize to him, but Bersun could only shake his head, saying he had no idea where Ranson was. Determined, Daisy rushed to his quarters, praying he had returned, but when she opened the door, her heart froze. Ranson lay on the floor, unconscious, drenched in blood. She screamed his name and threw herself toward him. Later, after he had been moved to his bed, Bersun instructed Daisy to inform him when Ranson awoke. Daisy promised solemnly that she would remain by his side. She sat silently, her eyes fixed on his battered form. She thought to herself with bitter sorrow that he had once been the strongest among them, yet because of them, he had grown so weak. Ashamed, she admitted inwardly that she wished for death every time he suffered on their behalf. Suddenly, Ranson gasped awake, his hand clutching at his chest. His eyes darted to his prosthetic arm, panic overtaking him as he remembered that he had only managed to drink half the elixir. He sat upright, confused, wondering if it had all been some cruel dream, but quickly realized he was truly back in his room. Daisy leaned closer with worry, asking what had happened, why he had disappeared, and why he had returned bloodied. Ranson simply stared at her in silence, which made her ask uneasily why he was looking at her in such a way. With a faint smile, he asked her if she had just called him brother. Her face flushed red as she denied it furiously, but Ranson pointed out that her eyes were swollen from tears. He teased her, asking if she had been that worried about him. Embarrassed, Daisy snapped that she had been, and asked if it was wrong to worry. Ranson thanked her softly, patting her on the head. She muttered that she was not a child anymore, but he only smiled, thinking how long it had been since he had teased her so. Then his body shuddered. A wave of dizziness struck him, and he nearly fell from the bed. Daisy panicked, calling his name as she rushed to steady him, but he reassured her faintly that it was not painful. Ranson touched his face in disbelief. His eyes widened as realization dawned. This had not been a dream. One sip, he had thought, would never be enough, and yet, it was real. Daisy stared in shock as the prosthetic pieces of his body began to fall away, clattering to the floor one by one. With a firm voice, Ranson declared that he had returned. Daisy's eyes widened in terror and astonishment, unable to process what she was seeing. But his body, overwhelmed by the transformation, gave way, and he collapsed again as she cried out his name in horror. When Ranson awoke once more, he found the children gathered around him, wide-eyed with disbelief. His limbs had grown back. He lifted his gaze and saw Bersun, Daisy, and the others staring at him in awe. Bersun broke the silence, asking how such a miracle was possible, and what had truly happened to him. Ranson answered calmly that he had drunk the elixir. His words stunned Bersun, who exclaimed in disbelief, asking if he truly meant that legendary medicine, the one so rare that a single sip was valued at more than 50,000. Ranson told him to wait a moment, explaining that there was something he needed to confirm first. Rising to his feet, he steadied himself, and Bersun anxiously asked if he was all right, if his body could truly move again. Ranson reassured him that he was fine. Though his body would require some rehabilitation, it was nothing he could not endure. He then asked Bersun to accompany him, and despite some hesitation, Bersun agreed. Ranson led him toward an ancient stone altar hidden deep within the ruins. He told Bersun that he was certain another elixir rested there. Bersun surveyed the broken chamber and demanded to know what had happened here. Ranson admitted he too struggled to believe it, but explained that this was precisely why he had come, to verify. He recalled his journey into the past, remembering how the guards had been unusually concentrated around this site, and concluded that the altar itself was the key to a secret chamber. When he placed the key into the altar, a luminous magic circle blazed to life, unveiling a hidden entrance. Both men were struck silent by astonishment. Before them stretched a vault overflowing with gold coins worth untold fortunes, ancient relics, weapons, shields, and enchanted tools. Bersun's voice shook as he asked how any of this, combined with Ranson's miraculous regeneration, could be explained. Ranson admitted he could scarcely believe it himself. Then, with grave clarity, he revealed the truth, that he had walked this place 10,000 years ago. The revelation shattered Bersun's composure, leaving him in shock. Ranson affirmed that his journey through time had been real. A thought crystallized in his mind. If the artifact's power was not bound to a single use, if he could return to the past again and again, then nothing would remain beyond his reach. Yet before pursuing that path, he told Bersun there was something else he must do first. Elsewhere, Nagi lounged idly, reveling in what he believed was the true life, and wondered aloud what pleasures the day might hold. He decided to seek out Ranson, whom he mockingly referred to as the Wreck. But as he approached the room, he froze in astonishment. Ranson himself stood there waiting. Nagi sneered, asking if Ranson had come out to meet him, but then his expression twisted in shock as he noticed his restored arms and legs. Panic seized him. He barked at his men to flee at once, to inform their master that Ranson had regained his core. He commanded them to scatter, to move as quickly as possible. But they never got the chance. Ranson drew his blade, and in one swift, precise motion, unleashed a devastating strike. The blow split apart mid-flight, cutting down both fleeing comrades before they could escape. Nagi stared in horror, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Ranson's aura threads shimmered around him as he surged forward. Regaining his composure, Nagi scoffed. He remarked that Ranson was relying on aura threads rather than a full aura blade, concluding with disdain that his core had not yet fully recovered. Ranson replied coldly, asking what of it, and commanded Nagi to receive his strike. Nagi sneered, arrogance dripping from his words. He proclaimed that he was no longer the same as 3 years ago, that he now stood as blood kin to the Count, elevated into the ranks of the noble class. He boasted of his superior body, his regenerative abilities that defied death, and the monstrous power of his vampiric aura, which he claimed made him untouchable. With unwavering confidence, Nagi unleashed a blazing red strike, certain that even a swordmaster could not withstand it. Yet in the very next instant, his confidence shattered into horror. The attack curved away from Ranson's blade, then rebounded as if redirected by an unseen force, slashing back into its caster. In stunned disbelief, Nagi's head was severed cleanly from his shoulders. His head thudded to the ground, and his body dissolved into smoke, vanishing like a vampire slain in the night. Ranson exhaled, thinking to himself that while his core had recovered, his aura remained fragmented and still needed to be reforged. Later, as they gathered, Daisy asked Ranson if it was true that he had traveled to the past after drinking the elixir. Ranson confirmed her suspicion, explaining that the power of time travel had come from the royal family's treasure. Bursun pressed him further, asking if he could return again. Ranson admitted that he did not know. The treasure had been silent since, and he did not even understand how the book had transported him in the first place. At that moment, C. Milan, heir to the Ilnian family, interjected. She said that if the treasure was indeed a relic from the age of magic, then returning might be possible. Ranson frowned, wondering aloud how divine power could be confined within such a small artifact. Daisy then posed a troubling question. The elixir was said to have been discovered 2 centuries ago, so how could it exist if Ranson had already consumed it 10,000 years earlier? Realization struck him. He concluded that the answer lay in the fact that he had only drunk half the bottle before returning. He turned to Bursun and asked if any records mentioned only half of the elixir being recovered. Bursun replied that no such detail existed, only vague accounts of its discovery. Ranson mused that perhaps the whole bottle was meant to be found, but by drinking half of it, he had altered history itself, leaving only the remainder for later generations. C remarked that one thing was certain: if he could return to the past again, his choices there had the power to reshape the entire world. She then asked him what he would strive for if given such an opportunity. Ranson paused, reflecting, before answering firmly. His first goal, he said, was to avenge his parents and siblings who had been slaughtered overnight. His second was to fulfill his duty as the last surviving member of the Banrua royal line. Ultimately, his true purpose was to restore the fallen Banrua kingdom, but before that, Count Cassius must die. He confessed bitterly that once, long ago, he had believed submitting to the Lord of Kushan would protect his family. Only too late had he realized that borrowed happiness was never secure, and that relying on others had led only to ruin. C warned him gravely that Count Cassius was no ordinary enemy. He was already a swordmaster, and after consuming Delkachu's pure blood, no one knew how powerful he had become. But Ranson declared that choice no longer existed. If Cassius discovered his recovery, the man would unleash chaos without restraint. This confrontation was inevitable, a battle he could not avoid. For that reason, he reminded them, the tax report owed to the Count was due in 3 weeks. Their preparations had to be completed before that deadline. Ranson then withdrew into solitude, dedicating himself to training. He focused on mastering the ruthless sword style wielded by the cult leader of 10 millennia past. He recalled the merciless cuts, the piercing aura, and above all, the scornful words that had branded him a novice incapable of reading the heart of the sword. Now, through meditation and practice, he grasped their meaning. It was not about speaking to the blade, but about becoming inseparable from it, sword and soul united as one. With this realization, he understood that the power he had faced long ago was no ordinary aura, but something transcendent. His training was abruptly interrupted when Daisy burst in, her voice trembling as she cried out that something terrible had happened, and that it concerned Count Cassius. Meanwhile, within the dark halls of the Count's castle, one of his men reported respectfully that Ranson's family had been invited to the castle in 3 days. Count Cassius replied coldly that he had waited long enough for the remnants of the Manhwa kingdom. He declared that the time had come to use them as sacrifices. Far away, Ranson and his companions gathered to discuss this sudden summons, one that had arrived 3 weeks before the tax report was due. Bursun speculated aloud that perhaps the Count had discovered Ranson's restored body and Naji's death. But C dismissed the idea, saying that Cassius would more likely assume the rebels were responsible. She explained that the true problem was different. The invitation shattered their carefully laid plan to assassinate him. Their only chance, she revealed, was to strike during the rituals Cassius performed. When Ranson asked about those rituals, C explained that since his injury, the Count left the castle once a month to perform them alone. Daisy added nervously that she had seen Cassius's men abducting children. C confirmed this, stating that villages unable to pay taxes were destroyed, their people slaughtered, and their children taken as living sacrifices. Ranson was shaken by the revelation. He realized Cassius was offering corpses and living souls to some unknown power, and he declared grimly that they could no longer think of him as the same man they had once known. With bitterness, he lamented how much had changed while he had been crippled and helpless. He then asked C how she had come by such knowledge. C replied calmly that she had her own intelligence network. Ranson frowned with concern, rebuking her for risking herself in such a dangerous city. But C cut him off sharply, saying that their plans had already gone astray. Bursun defended her, reminding him that she was 20 years old now, no longer a child. Daisy, troubled, asked Ranson anxiously if he truly had the strength to defeat Cassius. Ranson replied firmly that he must, and that with the sword in his hand he finally had a real chance. Bursun recognized the blade instantly, exclaiming that it was the king's sword. Ranson explained that the weapon had been forged from silver steel that had fallen from the heavens, shaped with aura itself. He stated with certainty that corrupted beings such as vampires could not withstand its edge. C then declared she would trust him, but with a wry smile added that if they failed, they could always die together. Ranson's anger flared at her careless remark. She quickly claimed she had been joking, but then grew serious again, saying they still needed an alternative method to kill the Count. Ranson concluded the discussion by insisting that their current plan, dangerous as it was, remained their only path forward. The scene shifted to a quiet village called Luera. Children played joyfully in the fields, comparing the mushrooms they had gathered. One of them laughed and suggested they measure them once they returned home. But suddenly, flames erupted throughout the village. The children froze in terror as soldiers clad in armor and skull-like masks descended upon the helpless villagers. The soldiers slaughtered them mercilessly, loading corpses into carts as the settlement burned. Then the soldiers spotted the children and gave the order that none of them be allowed to escape. The frightened children were quickly surrounded. Just as the soldiers advanced, arrows whistled through the air, piercing their ranks. A mysterious man appeared, asking the children if they were safe. A little boy, wide-eyed, asked who he was. The man introduced himself as Rivera Pietro. The children whispered his name with awe. The boy exclaimed in shock, asking if he was truly a baron. Rivera told them there was no time for explanations. The only thing that mattered was fleeing the village. But the children refused, crying and screaming that their mothers were still inside. Rivera clenched his teeth, realizing that cutting down a handful of soldiers would not halt the slaughter. With heavy regret, he muttered that the Count had gone too far. Back at the Count's castle, carts laden with corpses arrived. A soldier reported to his master that 116 bodies had been collected, more than required for that day's ritual. Cassius, revealing his vampiric form, dismissed his men, saying he would handle the rest alone. The Count thought to himself that tomorrow, Ranson's children would arrive at his castle. With a sinister smile, he declared that the long-awaited moment was finally at hand. He began his ritual, drawing sinister energy from the lifeless bodies. But in the midst of his work, he sensed something unusual. Narrowing his eyes, he tore the cover off one of the carts. The Count reeled back in shock, caught off guard by a sudden strike. The story then returned to an earlier moment, when C laid out her plan. She explained that, according to her network, The corpses from Luera village would be carted into the castle that very day. She instructed Ranson to disguise himself among the dead, conceal his aura, and wait until the Count was unguarded before making his move. The plan worked. Ranson emerged before Count Cassius, who regarded him with surprise and mockery, asking what had brought him unannounced. Ranson knew immediately that this battle would not be won easily. Cassius congratulated him with a sneer, remarking that he must have recovered by finding an elixir. Ranson realized strategy had carried him as far as it could. From this point onward, only strength would decide the outcome. The Count readied himself, announcing gleefully that he hoped to witness Ranson sink into magnificent despair. Ranson sharpened every sense. Now, more than ever, he felt he could read the heart of the sword. With a burst of speed, he launched his first strike. Cassius countered with immense blasts of crimson energy, forcing Ranson to dodge desperately. The Count gave him no space to breathe, charging forward with monstrous speed. Their blades collided in a storm of sparks as Ranson was driven back. Gathering his sword aura, Ranson unleashed a furious counterstrike. Cassius admitted with a grin that it was an impressive blow. He remarked that had Ranson's aura been weaker, his head would have flown from his shoulders. With a sly smile, the Count said this was exactly the skill he expected from one born of Manhwa. Shock rippled through Ranson as he realized Cassius knew his identity. Cassius confirmed it without hesitation, declaring that he must be the second prince of Manhwa, the boy whose body had never been found. He described Ranson as a rare treasure and promised that if he offered his noble soul in sacrifice, he could see his deepest desires fulfilled. Ranson's response was a fierce attack, but the Count parried easily, telling him his efforts were wasted and that no blade could pierce his aura. Blue light flared as Ranson's aura clashed violently with the crimson tide, and the collision erupted into a massive explosion. Elsewhere, Rivera Pietro had gathered his men in haste. They demanded to know the reason for the sudden call. Rivera explained he had received intelligence that something extraordinary was about to occur. One man pressed him to reveal the nature of this intelligence, but before Rivera could answer, the horizon ignited with a blinding flash. The soldiers recoiled, terrified, as they recognized the glow of the red blade. They whispered that it could only be Count Cassius, and asked in disbelief who dared fight him. Rivera raised his binoculars, narrowing his eyes at the two figures locked in combat. One of his men took the glass from him, looked, and gasped in shock, whispering a single name: Ranson. The others scoffed, saying it was impossible, questioning if Ranson had truly regained his strength. Rivera recalled C's warning, that Ranson had been given one final chance, and it would not come again. She had urged him to decide carefully whether to seize the moment or let it slip away, burdened with regret for the rest of his life. Rivera wrestled with doubt. Could Ranson truly slay the Count? He thought bitterly that their so-called rebellion had done little more than rescue a handful of children. To side with Ranson now meant staking all their lives. One of his men asked if they would simply stand by and watch. Rivera clenched his jaw and declared that they could not. He said they must act, then quietly apologized to his men for the danger he was dragging them into. Back at the castle, the battle raged on. Ranson and Cassius exchanged blow after blow, the air thick with fire and steel. Summoning his last reserves, Ranson raised his blade and cried out, pouring all his strength into a single strike. The Count's eyes widened as the attack landed, cutting deep into his neck and drawing blood. With a snarl of rage, he cursed Ranson's name. Ranson, his body trembling and drenched in exhaustion, stood his ground, barely able to remain upright. The Count clutched the bleeding wound at his neck and admitted grudgingly that Ranson's swordsmanship was magnificent. He said that perhaps one day Ranson might truly pierce his defenses, but only if he could reach him first. With a dark incantation, the Count summoned an army of his vampire followers. In an instant, the chamber was filled with snarling creatures, their crimson eyes fixed on Ranson. He gritted his teeth, frustrated. His plan had been to confront the Count alone, after sneaking into the castle hidden among corpses. Now, surrounded by wave after wave of foes, he realized their numbers were endless. If this continued, his strength would collapse before he could strike the Count. One vampire lunged at him, claws slashing, but Ranson sidestepped with ease. He resolved to cut through the lesser spawn quickly. Yet before he could move, a silver arrow tore through the air, piercing the vampire's chest. The creature crumbled into ash, and the others recoiled in shock. whispering among themselves about the aura-infused silver arrow. The Count snarled in fury, demanding to know who dared to interfere. Rivera Pietro stepped into the chamber, bow in hand, his expression calm and sharp. And he was not alone. Salzaron entered beside him, calling out to Ranson and addressing him as brother. Ranson's eyes widened at the sight. Even more, he was stunned as C and Daisy appeared, with Cyclone close behind. Rivera's deputy raised his sword and led their knights into battle, shouting that every villain gathered here today would die, and commanded his men to strike without mercy. C took charge of the battlefield, directing their forces with precision. Rivera loosed arrow after arrow, each one finding its mark and felling a vampire. Daisy and Cyclone fought courageously, blades flashing as they carved their way through the horde. Anxious, Ranson demanded to know why they had come, fearing they would be gravely hurt. Daisy rebuked him sharply, asking why he always tried to bear everything alone. She reminded him that they were no longer children, but adults, and this was a battle they all had to fight together. Salzaron added his voice, telling Ranson to leave the rest to them and focus solely on the Count. Ranson looked at them, at their determination and resolve, and a faint smile touched his lips. This was no time to treat them as helpless. His eyes turned back to Cassius, and he gripped his sword with renewed strength, ready to face the enemy only he could confront. The Count sneered, promising to begin by ripping off Ranson's arm. His hand morphed into a monstrous red claw as he lunged forward. But Ranson raised a necklace, and a golden barrier erupted in a violent explosion, blasting the Count backward. Cassius staggered in shock, staring at the stump where his hand had been. He demanded to know what had just occurred. Ranson answered, shouting that it was the protection necklace. He gazed at the shattered artifact in his palm, explaining that it had been recovered from ancient ruins. Though he regretted destroying it, it had fulfilled its purpose. He added that after an all-out assault, a gap always revealed itself, and through that gap he had prepared to unleash his true trump card. He focused, pouring every ounce of his will into his blade. His heart and the sword's heart became one. A massive whirlwind of blue energy surged forth, roaring like a storm. The Count answered with a furious roar, releasing his blood-red aura, declaring that Ranson would die here. He struck against the storm, but the whirlwind absorbed his power, untouched. The furious clash cracked the very air. Ranson pressed forward, his storm carving into the crimson shield around Cassius. Bit by bit, a fracture opened at the Count's neck. Through that gap, Ranson drove his decisive strike. Cassius collapsed, his body writhing as his final breath escaped him. With eyes clouded in disbelief, he muttered, asking if what had struck him was the legendary Soul Blade. Ranson, panting, replied that he had only tried to merge the ancient sword energy with the Aura Blade. He admitted even he did not know if this was truly the Soul Blade, symbol of the Grand Master. As Cassius's life faded, his vampire followers shrieked in agony. One after another, they fell where they stood, their bodies withering to nothing. Rivera's men looked on in confusion, asking what strange force had suddenly brought their enemies low. Rivera quickly understood that Ranson had done the impossible. Count Cassius was truly dead. He approached in disbelief, staring at the fallen vampire lord, and admitted that he could hardly believe Ranson had accomplished it. He explained that, according to old records, when vampires lose their master, they lose their sanity for a day or two. Ranson asked if that meant they would eventually return to normal, and Rivera confirmed it. He added that this small window gave them the perfect chance to hunt down the remnants. Rivera offered to lead his men to finish the task by the end of the night, and Ranson agreed without hesitation. Rivera then stepped forward, thanking him sincerely, saying he had given them the chance to avenge their fallen comrades. Ranson told him that they, too, owed Rivera a debt, and suggested they work together to rebuild the city into a place worth living in. At that, Rivera revealed the Pietro family crest, confessing that he had planned to wait before doing so, but the urgency of events had forced his hand. He explained that his family had once been part of the Gloryland nobility, 3 centuries ago. Presenting the crest to Ranson, he declared his intention to serve him as his lord from that day forward. Later, Ranson spoke privately with C, who remarked that she had expected Rivera to go so far as to pledge his crest. Surprised, Ranson asked if she knew him well. She replied that she knew him somewhat, revealing that she had acquired much of her information through Rivera's men. Ranson was taken aback, realizing she had risked collaborating dangerously with his forces. But C brushed it off, insisting she had only offered them a little help. She urged that instead of worrying over the vampires, they should leave the cleanup to Rivera and focus on collecting proof of Cassius's crimes. She explained that the more they exposed his corruption, the more the citizens would rally behind them. Ranson agreed, knowing that after Cassius's fall, support from the people was vital if they were to govern Kushan. Together, they formed an investigative team that included merchants and citizen representatives. While searching the castle church, C remarked that it looked disappointingly ordinary. Ranson agreed. Still, they uncovered an unsettling stone statue. C then gestured to the necklace around Ranson's neck and asked about it. Suddenly, the necklace glowed. Ranson frowned, confused why it was reacting now. He took out the asterisk Book of Fate, which began glowing green just as it had before. C recognized it immediately and suggested he open it. But Ranson refused sharply. He feared being hurled back into the past again, explaining that if he vanished now, factions would tear the city apart in their absence. C conceded, urging him to hide the book. Yet before he could, it opened on its own, revealing words about the asterisk Lord of the Clear Sky returning with the cult's treasure. The royal seal flared with light, and in an instant, Ranson was swept back once again. This time he found himself seated on a moving cart rolling through a grassy field. He blinked in confusion, realizing he was not alone, but part of a group. Across from him sat a man in a robe radiating immense pressure, so powerful that even Ranson, who had stood against Cassius and the cult, felt his chest tighten. The man addressed him as Ranson and asked if he had awakened. Ranson thought in awe that this figure was far beyond the cult leader he had once faced. It wasn't only his aura. The mana in the entire region seemed to swirl and bend toward him, something Ranson thought even a Grand Master would struggle to achieve. The robed man said he had encountered him by chance and taken him on as a disciple. Ranson realized that in this timeline, his role was that of the man's pupil. One of the escorts questioned when their master had taken this boy as a disciple. The master replied that he himself had shown interest a week ago and had accepted him then. He confirmed the decision firmly, remarking that the meeting had been strangely fated, as though guided by divine will. Ranson studied him in silence, unsettled. This man was nothing like the cultists who had treated him as one of their own. His presence was entirely different, commanding, enigmatic, and unpredictable. The man introduced himself as Grand Duke Lathena Celsius, explaining that the eradication of cultists had long been his desire. Then he turned his gaze to Ranson, addressing him as Ranchan Van Roa, and reminded him that a week earlier he had accepted him as his disciple. He told him they were now on their way to his castle, where he would begin teaching him. Ranson wondered uneasily why the Duke was speaking to him in such a calm and gentle tone. The Duke, however, spoke warmly of their shared aspirations, saying he looked forward to achieving them together. A troubling thought struck Ranson. Perhaps the Duke had already discovered his true identity. Everything about this situation felt strange. Even though the Duke treated him kindly, Ranson could not shake the suspicion that he knew more than he revealed. Meanwhile, the other Ranson played his role naturally, voicing his pride at traveling alongside his master. Seeking clarity, Ranson decided to test him, asking if the Duke was truly certain about his choice, considering he did not even know who Ranson truly was. The Duke admitted the strangeness of it all, but added that there was one thing he felt certain about. If what was happening now aligned with his greater goal, then perhaps it was something he had already accepted long ago. Ranson could not understand what he meant. The Duke explained that he did not know for sure himself. It was simply a feeling. Ranson stood in silence, baffled by the weight the Duke placed on that word. The more he thought about it, the more he felt the madness of his situation. The cart continued its journey until they reached a towering castle of shining steel. Ranson stared in awe, wondering how he had ended up here in such an inexplicable way. The Duke gestured toward it, telling him this was the City of Knights, glowing steel, where he resided. He explained that although he bore the title of Grand Duke, he left most governance to his retainers so that he could devote his time to teaching the younger generation. As they traveled, Ranson realized the Duke was subtly teaching him about the customs and etiquette of this ancient era. Slowly, he began to adapt to life in this time. With no way of returning to his world for now, he decided he had no choice but to focus on the present. He thought to himself that this age was far more advanced in skills and swordsmanship than his own, and resolved to take advantage of his presence here to gain new knowledge as he had before. The Duke then mentioned that another disciple awaited them at the castle, a diligent youth with a strong sense of justice, and that Ranson would soon meet him. When they arrived, however, Ranson was stunned. The other disciple was the blonde knightess he had encountered during his last journey into the past. Her eyes widened in equal shock at the sight of him. The Duke noticed their reaction and asked if they knew one another. The knightess confirmed it, reminding her master of the man who had aided her at the cult's church a year earlier, insisting this man was the same. The Duke recalled hearing of a swordsman who used a peculiar technique and smiled, saying it pleased him that they were already acquainted. He then told her that from this day forward, Ranson would be her junior, and as his senior she was to guide him well. The knightess stared in disbelief, questioning the idea of him being her junior. The Duke explained firmly that he had already taken Ranson as his disciple, but with his recent busyness, she would be responsible for training him in the meantime. With that, the Duke excused himself, saying he had matters to discuss with the sorcerers inside the castle. Ranson could hardly believe the situation. That he should meet her again here, and that she was already the Duke's disciple, seemed beyond coincidence. He stepped forward to greet her, extending his hand and expressing his happiness at their reunion. But she sharply cut him off, asking what he thought he was doing. She scolded him, asking if this was how one ought to greet a superior. Ranson was caught off guard by her strict tone. She spoke gravely, saying that whatever life he had lived until now, from this moment forward they were both disciples of the same master, and nothing else mattered. She asked him if she was wrong. He had no choice but to admit she was right. She continued, explaining that to avoid shaming their master, they must take care in everything they did. She stressed that their appearances and conduct must always be flawless. She then scrutinized him harshly, asking when he had last polished his shoes, pointing out that his cloak was crooked, and criticizing his disheveled hair. Finally, she declared that looking so unkempt made him no different from a bandit. When Ranson's eyes drifted toward her hair, she grew furious, demanding to know why he was staring. Ranson retorted sarcastically, wondering how she could scold him with her own hair in such a style. Her hand instinctively touched her locks, and she flushed with embarrassment. Flustered, she turned and fled. The other knights nearby whispered that she always picked at others' faults, which brought a quiet smile to Ranson's lips. Later, on the training ground, the knightess introduced herself formally as Yuden Serum. She stated she was a knight of the Grand Duke's personal guard and a member of the Horizon Knight Squad. She admitted that Ranson might already be stronger than her, but reminded him that their master had said he could not yet properly control his sword energy. Swordsmanship, she said, was something that must be learned through combat itself. Yuden drew her sword and ordered him to do the same, declaring that it was time for a senior to teach her junior the basics of swordsmanship. Ranson realized this was the true reason they had come here, though she insisted her challenge had nothing to do with the embarrassment she had suffered earlier and asked him not to misunderstand. Ranson gave no argument. He quietly drew his sword, thinking that when blades were crossed, words were unnecessary. Yuden Serum stands in the sunlit training hall, her gaze calm yet focused. She says that Ranson should not misunderstand. She is not taking up the sword out of embarrassment from what happened earlier. She adds firmly that he should not get the wrong idea. Ranson replies that it is good, drawing his blade with a sharp, ringing sound. He sets his stance and says that before the sword, words are unnecessary. Yuden steps forward, her movements fluid as she explains that they cannot control mana directly. She says that this is why their focus lies on the sword's will, the spirit that dwells within the blade. As her foot slides forward, her sword flashes, and she states that that will has only one purpose, to cut. The strike whistles through the air, so fast it blurs. Ranson's eyes narrow. Their blades collide, steel ringing against steel, sparks scattering as the floor trembles beneath them. Their swords press and slide apart. Over the hiss of steel, Yuden continues, saying that mana only gathers in response to will. Ranson feels something strange running through his grip and says that this sensation is completely new to him. They reset, blades poised again in a mirrored cross. Yuden resumes, saying that while being able to manipulate mana directly would indeed be an advantage, he must remember that the domain is the foundation, while mana is only the roof. She concludes that the foundation must always come first. Lowering her sword, Yuden raises a finger as if to mark the next lesson. She says that now, he should try to produce sword aura. Ranson nods and says that he understands. He steadies his breath, and faint light begins to shimmer along his blade's edge. Yuden studies the glow, arms folded, a thoughtful hum on her lips. After a moment, she turns, retrieves another sword, and returns to hand it to him. She says that this time, he should attempt to produce sword aura using this blade. Ranson draws the new weapon, testing its balance with a smooth, easy swing. The steel hums low, the air rippling around it. He stiffens and looks at the vibrating edge, saying that something strange is happening. The sword continues to sing in his hands, the resonance deepening as if it were awakening to his intent. Yuden nods and says that it is just as she suspected. She explains that sword aura emerges from the power of the sword's soul, meaning that the finer the blade, the stronger the spirit within. She says that the only reason he was able to draw sword aura so easily was because that weapon's spirit is exceptional. After a moment of quiet observation, Yuden says that his current level is that of a low expert, barely at the entry stage. Ranson reacts with surprise and says that he is only low rank, almost entry level. Yuden explains that this low rank is the stage of reading the sword, where one begins to sense the sword's heart and follow the path it reveals. She finishes by saying that his first task is to learn how to draw sword aura from any blade, not just a superior one. Ranson tightens his grip, determination hardening his eyes, and says that good, he will train through the night. Morning light spills into the courtyard. A voice calls his name closer this time. He blinks awake on the cold stone ground. Yuden stands over him with her hands on her hips and says that this cannot possibly be what he considers a bed. She adds sharply that she told him to maintain proper appearance and behave carefully so as not to tarnish their master's reputation, then demands to know why he is still wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Ranson stands, dusts himself off, and says that he did not sleep. He draws his sword quietly. His eyes focus. Aura floods the blade. A vivid blue arc bursts outward with a sweeping swing, the ground shaking beneath the pressure. Yuden's eyes widen as she exclaims that he could not do this yesterday. How is it possible? Ranson answers simply that he practiced all night. Yuden shakes her head in disbelief and says that even with practice, no one improves that quickly, not even the most gifted. They take at least a week. Then she composes herself and says that regardless, this is good progress, announcing that they will move straight to the advanced stage. Ranson meets her gaze and says yes, requesting to continue, calling her senior. They clash immediately. Ranson's sword aura flares in a blue crescent, while Yuden's meets it in a golden arc. The twin waves explode on impact, scattering light. He drives forward through the haze. Their swords meet again with a thunderous crack, sparks leaping as both test their power and precision. Ranson presses harder, his blade sweeping another blue crescent. Yuden counters with gold, their auras slashing across the floor in twin trails. From the sidelines, onlookers whisper. One says that this cannot be real, another says that she is actually being pushed back, and a third adds that she is even using her sword rest now. Yuden plants her feet, her sword whipping out in a burst of blinding speed. Silver-white afterimages trail her movements as she closes in. Ranson's eyes narrow, sweat glinting at his temple, as her sword grazes past and halts at his side with lightning precision. He says that her speed is unbelievable. She lowers her weapon and says that she has reached the level of a high expert, having attained the state of sword rest, where the sword moves by itself. Ranson wonders silently if such a state truly exists, where the blade acts before thought. Yuden straightens and says that in 2 weeks, there will be an exchange meet, where you will face a direct disciple in combat. She says that all eyes will be on him, Ranson Vanloan, newly chosen disciple of Archduke Lythian. Fixing him with a calm but firm gaze, she says that this means he must advance at least one level higher before then. Ranson smiles faintly and replies that, as expected, things are getting interesting. Footsteps echo across the hall. A rough voice clicks its tongue and mutters that damn Lythian. The voice continues, saying that first he took in an orphan girl, and now a nameless drifter. The same man scoffs that to think the Archduke would take in such worthless strays as disciples. The figure steps into view, and the name appears, Kashigier Celsius. Kashigier Celsius strides out of the hall, his boots striking hard against the stone, and says that it is absurd the Archduke would take in such worthless strays as disciples. He introduces himself with pride as he moves toward the yard, adding that if the Archduke's judgment has truly fallen this low, then he himself should have been the one to inherit the headship. Yuden raises her voice and says that her fellow disciple should be mindful of his words, reminding him that many eyes are watching. Kashigir's expression twists as he snaps back, saying that she is lecturing him now. He goes on bitterly, saying that just because Lythian named her heir, she already acts as if she leads the house. He continues venomously, saying that Lythian took a street orphan who would have starved in the gutter and made something of them, yet they cannot even show gratitude. He says that with such miserable character, they should at least step down with dignity, and then sneers that they are barely at the level of a high expert. He adds with mockery that he heard the new one is just a low expert, calling them a truly pathetic lot. He waves a hand dismissively and says whatever, before demanding that they bring out the heirloom treasure, the one he claims Lythian stole, so he can see for himself how great it supposedly is. Yuden straightens and says firmly that that cannot be done, that the treasure is not something to flaunt recklessly. Kashigir's eyes narrow. He bristles and says that she is trying to lecture him again. Ranson watches quietly, thinking that perhaps the Archduke truly has a human side if he keeps someone like that close. He steps forward and addresses him as fellow disciple, saying that if Kashigir wants to prove his words, they can test whether their master's judgment is right. Kashigir looks up sharply and says what, startled. Ranson continues, saying that if his swordsmanship is as unworthy as claimed, then a duel would make it clear, and that if he loses, would that not validate Kashigir's point? Yuden exclaims his name in alarm, but Kashigir smirks with disdain and says how arrogant, asking who would bother to spar with a mere boy barely fit to be a disciple. Ranson's mouth curves into a small smile as he says that it is simple, Kashigir can silence everyone by defeating him with those so-called refined skills. Kashigir's jaw tightens. He clenches his fists and growls yes, calling him an insolent brat, and says that they will see how long his arrogance lasts. He turns on his heel and marches off, saying darkly that they will see soon enough. Yuden faces Ranson, flustered, and says that this is serious trouble, explaining that that disciple is petty and vindictive, and who knows what schemes he might plan for the exchange meet. Ranson glances at the onlookers who still snicker and says that are they done laughing now? Yuden clears her throat awkwardly and says that what happened earlier was a mistake. He answers evenly that it is fine, and says that no matter what tricks Kashigir uses, they will still beat him. Yuden exhales and says very well, then adds that they should resume training. Night settles over the academy grounds. Ranson hears a faint rustle and quietly says Yuden's name, uncertain. She stands by a low stone outcrop, her silhouette framed by starlight, and says that he came out to train tonight too. He startles slightly and says yes, before asking if she is stargazing. Then he realizes with a start that he spoke too casually. She glances sideways and hums thoughtfully, asking if he wants to look as well. He hesitates and asks whether she will not scold him for speaking so informally. She shakes her head and says that no one is around, and adds that he saved her life, so she will not scold him for that. He says oh, softly. Then she continues, saying that she had meant to tell him earlier that she is truly grateful, that he saved her and the children. He grins faintly and says that if she is that grateful, she should try using honorifics when they are alone, since he is her lifesaver, and, he adds, 3 years older than her, as she knows. Then, with a teasing tone, he says that still, having a junior use honorifics feels strange. He sidesteps the topic and asks whether she likes stargazing. She replies that not only the stars, but she enjoys watching the 13 patron stars. He repeats curiously that the 13 patron stars. She looks up at the glittering sky and explains that all stars move, except for 13 that remain fixed, never changing position. She says that these are named after divine patrons, the 13 patrons. Ranson, also watching the heavens, asks why she likes them so much. She points to one bright star and says that that is Hyvabar, the goddess of wisdom. She explains that here, Hyvabar shines directly above one's head, and there is nowhere else like it. She says that when she was young, she did not know where she belonged, but when she saw that star, she realized that was where she was meant to be. She concludes that this is why she loves watching the 13 patrons. Yuden rises and says that she should go, as she needs to prepare the special lecture for the exchange meet. Ranson watches her retreat and thinks, amused, that she is running off out of embarrassment. At dawn, Yuden halts before the massive doors of the arena and asks if he is ready. Ranson answers that yes, he is. Together, they step out into the courtyard, packed with people. Ranson glances around at the rows of academy uniforms and thinks that there are far more spectators than he expected. From the crowd, he catches murmurs, some saying that he is the Archduke's direct disciple and that it is hard to accept, others muttering that they will see for themselves. Ranson studies their faces and thinks that they all look ready to tear him apart. He reasons inwardly that it makes sense. No one wants their academy position threatened, so of course they resent him. An instructor steps to the center and declares that to open the exchange meet, the friendly matches will now begin. Ranson steadies himself as a broad-shouldered swordsman steps forward, his blade already drawn. The man says that he does not know why the Archduke chose Ranson as a direct disciple, but that this will soon change. He will defeat him and claim that title. Ranson lowers his sword with a small smile and says that anytime, before shifting his stance and repeating quietly that anytime. The two clash. Ranson's first strike breaks through the man's guard, the impact sending a shockwave across the ground. Steel shrieks and bends under the force. The man staggers back, exclaiming in disbelief at what kind of power this is. Ranson follows up with a fluid motion. His next blow slams against the man's sword, splitting it with a jagged crack that races up the blade. The challenger stares at the damage, trembling, as Ranson's momentum flows into the next precise, devastating strike. The battered challenger stares in disbelief, his eyes wide and his mouth trembling as he stammers that he's going to. Ranson's gaze sharpens, his expression set with calm focus as he drives a spiraling slash forward. The man's footing collapses under the pressure, his boots scraping hard against the floor, and a heartbeat later, fragments of shattered steel scatter around him in a harsh metallic rain. Yuden watches the outcome, surprise lighting her eyes. Kashigier Celsius stands rigid at the edge of the crowd, his jaw locked tight. Ranson lowers his sword and says that the next one should come forward. Yuden thinks that she expected him to improve quickly. After all, he had climbed from lower expert to mid-level in barely 2 weeks. But not to this extent. She notes inwardly that on top of that, he has already learned to channel mana through his blade. Ranson repeats flatly that the next should step up. Another opponent rushes forward. His aura flares blue, and in an instant, the man falls. Ranson says again that next. More challengers follow. Each one struck down by another clean, decisive blow. Each time, he straightens and says that next. From the onlookers, murmurs rise in disbelief. Some exclaim that he won again, others call him absurdly strong, while someone asks how many fights in a row he has taken now. Kashigir's expression twists darker with each word. He turns away, simmering with silent anger. Ranson glances toward the dais, thinking that so these are all the opponents their master arranged for him. He muses that it's a little underwhelming. He rolls his shoulder, exhaling once, and thinks that the final match is about to begin. The last opponent steps forward. A hooded youth, his grip trembling as faint aura flickers around his sword. The young man calls out that he's ready. Ranson braces, aura flaring. Their blades meet with a roar of impact, a wave of blue slicing through the air. The hooded figure hits the floorboards hard, his sword bouncing free. Ranson looks down at him and thinks that he still looks so young, maybe he overdid it. The boy's hands shake as he forces himself upright, eyes shadowed beneath the hood. His shoulders tremble, but he steadies his stance, bows deeply to Ranson, and then turns away, hurrying off the field without a word. Ranson watches him go, his sword lowered at his side, a small look of quiet satisfaction crossing his face. Later, beneath the academy's glass-domed hall, tables overflow with food and the hum of conversation fills the air. Yuden Guest says that she's just glad the sparring ended without any major incident, and Ranson agrees that it was fortunate. Yuden, dressed in a crisp white formal uniform beside Ranson, says that now all that remains is to finish the graduation banquet properly, and asks that there are no issues left, right? Ranson glances sideways at her and says that her outfit is. Yuden lifts her chin proudly and says that this level of formality is the minimum for a graduation event, adding that he should take notes. He pauses, his eyes flicking downward, and says sharply that wait, why is she wearing training shoes? Embarrassed, she quickly hurries off with bright red face. Ranson thinks to himself that some things never change with her, and then reflects that it's strange to think it has already been over a month since he arrived here. He muses that if the Book of Fate doesn't pull him away through time again, then it must mean something significant is about to happen at this exchange gathering. After a brief pause, he admits to himself that maybe he's just overthinking it. A soft voice calls out his name, Sir Ranson. He turns to see the hooded youth from earlier bowing awkwardly. The boy introduces himself as Milo Hyacinth, saying that it's an honor to see him again. Ranson blinks in recognition and says that so he's that kid from before. Milo nods eagerly, blurting that Sir Ranson is amazing. Ranson tilts his head in confusion and says that what? Milo goes on quickly, saying that he was completely captivated by Ranson's confidence and power, and now by his remarkable constitution, and that it was a true honor to fight him. Ranson rubs his neck, embarrassed, and says that thanks, while thinking that this level of admiration feels a bit much. Milo brightens and says that he actually has a unique constitution too, then pulls down his hood, revealing pointed ears. He says that he's half-elf. Ranson stares for a moment and thinks that so elves really do exist after all. Milo continues enthusiastically, saying that humans, well, he's human too, but anyway, most people can communicate easily with sword spirits. But for him, it's difficult to connect with souls bound to crafted objects like swords. He says that his dream is to be like Ranson, someone who can work with both sword spirits and elemental spirits freely. Ranson thinks that he's not even anything special, but as Milo talks, he can't help but think of his students for some reason. He isn't sure what to say, but finally he says that if Milo works hard, he'll definitely reach that goal. Milo nods with determination and says that actually, connecting with sword spirits has been getting easier lately thanks to a new procedure. Ranson raises a brow and asks that really. Milo explains that when one undergoes this procedure, not only does communication improve, but swordsmanship ability rises too, which is why everyone popular is getting it done now. Ranson frowns slightly and thinks that it sounds suspicious, almost like a kind of doping fad. Just then, a soft chime echoes through the glass dome. Milo looks up in awe and says that it's starting. Ranson asks what he means. Milo raises a finger toward the sky and says that the psychedelic moon has appeared. It shows up only once a month, and says that it's breathtaking to see it in person. Ranson follows his gaze. The triangular, prismatic moon drifts across the clouds, its glow shifting in colors. He says that that's what he calls beautiful, but before he can say more, a piercing scream cuts through the hall. A voice crying out in terror. Ranson's head snaps toward the sound, his instincts flaring, as someone says sharply that hey, what's wrong with you? Chaos explodes across the banquet hall as a guest convulses violently and collapses to the floor. Ranson freezes, his instincts surging, and says that what in the world? The man's scream cuts through the music like a blade. In moments, others double over, their bodies twisting and bones cracking grotesquely. Bestial roars echo beneath the chandeliers as several guests morph into red-eyed lycanthropes, their suits tearing apart under dark fur and muscle. Ranson grits his teeth and demands to know what is happening, wondering aloud if this is what the Book of Fate had been warning him about. Milo stumbles into him, pale and trembling, gasping that something feels wrong with his body. Before Ranson can move, black fur bursts across Milo's arms and face. Ranson calls his name in alarm. Half transformed, Milo looks at him with shaking eyes and asks weakly if he will be all right. Ranson shouts his name again and pleads for him to stay in control, to fight it off, but Milo's forming muzzle twists mid-word as he rasps Ranson's name one last time and stammers that he wanted to become a knight. His sentence ends in a guttural, inhuman roar as another werewolf lunges, claws flashing toward Ranson's throat. Before he could react, Milo jumps at the beast. After rolling away from Ranson, he bites down on the werewolf. Another werewolf appears behind Ranson. Sensing the danger, he turns around. Ranson meets the attack head-on, his aura blazing blue as his blade cuts in a blinding arc. Sparks burst as steel meets claw, but even as he counters, his face twists in disbelief and anger. He shouts that his strikes are doing nothing, that his blows are not landing as they should. Each hit glances off with little effect, and frustration tears from his throat as he yells again that his attacks are not working. A streak of golden light cuts between them as Yuden dives in. her sword cleaving through another beast. She calls his name sharply and orders him to get himself under control. She says that if they don't move now, both of them will die, and she gestures fiercely toward the exit. Ranson protests, shouting that they can't just leave Milo behind. But Yuden drives another werewolf back with a blazing slash and says that it is already too late. Ranson steadies his breath, his grip tightening. He says that fine, he understands, and that they have to get out. Her eyes narrow as she adds that these things are unbelievably strong, that she'll aim for their heads while he focuses on blocking their claws. Yuden slashes through another charging beast and snaps that they move too fast for that, then locks eyes with him and says fiercely that he can handle it, and so can she. The pack gathers, snarling and circling. Ranson draws in mana until blue fire ripples across his sword and skin. Dropping into a low stance, he charges forward. His blade sings as it carves a brilliant arc, slicing through a lunging werewolf in one fluid motion. Beside him, Yuden's golden swordlight flashes like lightning, severing another creature cleanly. More crash in from every direction. Ranson pivots, unleashing a wide crescent of pure blue energy that blasts the corridor open. The shockwave scatters the beasts, buying precious seconds. Yuden bursts through the gap, her sword moving in a blur as she clears the path ahead. They sprint through the marble hallway, the air thick with the stench of blood and smoke. Yuden shouts over the din that they are almost there, that once outside, they can regroup with the knights. She adds that the creatures are clearly after the treasure their master brought, and that they have to keep it from falling into their hands. At the end of the corridor, the massive double doors to the courtyard stand in sight, but two hulking were-beasts block the way, their claws scraping against the stone floor. Yuden says that this is the final obstacle and calls out that they have to push through one last time. Ranson raises an arm suddenly and tells her to stop. His voice drops low as he says that something is off. The beasts don't advance. Their eyes glow not with hunger, but with strange intelligence. And as Ranson watches, a chill runs down his spine. The monstrous wolf-headed abomination rears back with a blood-red glare as dozens of tentacles burst from its body, lashing through the cathedral like living whips. Ranson positions himself between the creature and Yuden, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the chaos as the writhing limbs carve trenches into stone. Around them, the cadet's blue eyes lock on the oncoming storm. She unleashes golden arcs of force that slice through the air, severing tentacles and scattering gore in radiant bursts. He realizes she's entered the state of sword suspension, a world where reaction time nears zero. She calls out that it's time to go, and he responds in kind. Together, they advance, cutting down the nearest coils. The severed flesh thrashes across the ground, wriggling as if still alive. A new surge of tentacles crashes toward them. Ranson spins his blade, tracing a bright crescent before him, cutting it down. He commands her to repel the wave. He studies the regenerating limbs and mutters that cutting alone won't work. His thought cuts short as more tendrils stab toward their ribs. Before he could react, she springs forward, taking his place while facing the tentacles. The tendril wraps around her waist and lifts her up into the air. Ranson could only look up in shock as everything happened too fast. In a burst of anger he prepares to attack. His eyes meet hers and before he could strike, a tendril pierces right through her. He stood frozen in place, shocked after seeing her being skewered. Moving with ghost-like precision, Ranson's blade whirls in a complete circle, unleashing rings of blue energy that shred the storm of flesh. Each stroke carves a crescent of light, severing limb after limb. Chunks of scarlet meat tumble as he darts through the chaos. He gathers strength and delivers a final, thunderous downward strike on the werewolf. The impact splits the beast. He stands amid the wreckage, breath unsteady, sword lowered. Dark blood spatters his boots. Without a word, Ranson steps forward through the carnage, his blade low at his side. Severed limbs twitch as he passes. Ahead, he pushes open a tall door, and brilliant white light pours over his face. Beyond it, the corridor lies in ruin, rubble strewn everywhere, distorted figures mid-motion, the air filled with the echo of monstrous screams. The scene warps and rushes toward him, collapsing into chaos. He lifts his head, the dried line of blood on his cheek catching the pale light as he watches the nightmarish scene. He stares at the horizon where pillars of color pierce the sky. He thinks that the light, yes, that light, is the cause of everything. Turning sharply, his boot strikes stone in a crisp echo. As he tries to take a step forward, he loses strength in his body and falls down, only to be caught in a flicker of memory. He thinks with a bitter ache that he thought he had grown stronger. But recalling Milo and Yuden, he admits inwardly that he failed to protect anyone. Lying on the stone street, a sudden voice declares the failure to alter history. He frowns, confused, and wonders who this female voice belongs to. The voice continues, broadcasting that it is consuming the broken causality to rewind time. That this power is limited, that if it fails, total defeat follows, and that it wishes him good luck. A book rises from the floor, its pages opening in a surge of green light. The glowing script unfolds across its leaves, recording that in the year 4673 of the Rosarius calendar, on November 2nd under clear skies, the master seized the cult's treasure and returned. The light compresses into a turquoise emblem, an ornate medallion, that falls into dark water. Ripples spread, droplets ringing softly, before a towering splash breaks the silence. The world shifts to bright noon. Hooves clatter against the dirt road. Ranson sits hooded on a wagon, squinting in the sunlight. Beside him, a bearded man reins the horses and glances over, greeting him by name. The man explains that they met by chance and that he took Ranson on as a disciple. Ranson studies his hands for a long moment and realizes he has returned to the beginning. He sits quietly, then speaks, addressing the man as master. He asks about the trophy the master brought back. The man replies that it is a relic of the cult. Ranson's eyes narrow. Inwardly, he thinks that such a relic must have caused all of this. He starts to warn his master that something terrible will happen because of it, but the older man cuts him off. The master says that whatever it is, it's something Ranson must bear, not he. Confused, Ranson asks what he means. The master admits he doesn't know, only that it feels deeply sorrowful. Then, almost gently, he thanks him. Ranson straightens on the wagon bench and says that if that's the case, he has another request, to be taught swordsmanship. The master's lips curl into a faint smirk, and crossing his arms, he says that starting this way is not so bad. Steel whispers free of its sheath. In the open field beneath the sun, the master plants his stance, golden energy winding around his sword. He says that from this point on, he will show Ranson the destination he must pursue. He instructs him to attack with everything he has. Ranson steadies his grip, blue energy flaring along his blade. He says that he is ready, and then he charges, cleaving the air in a sweeping arc that spins the wind into a roaring spiral. The vortex howls across the meadow, scattering grass and dust as nearby travelers raise their arms against the gale. The master stands his ground beneath the pressure, his sword gleaming with golden light. He raises it, channeling power into a single, clean strike. The descending blade meets the storm, and gold collides with blue, light exploding into countless motes that flutter like glowing petals. Ranson skids to a halt, eyes wide, the field washed in soft gold. He asks what this power is. The master, framed in drifting brilliance, answers that it is the realm of the filled sword, the state where steel and soul become one. He emphasizes again that the filled sword is the complete fusion of one's soul with one's blade in reality. He tells Ranson to remember the energy he saw today and to cultivate his spirit until it becomes as unyielding as steel. Ranson grips his sword tighter, his pulse quickening, and thinks that if he can reach that realm, he'll finally stand at that level. Time passes. Before the academy's grand facade, Yuden places a hand on her hilt and informs him that he will be the one teaching for now. Ranson turns toward the courtyard, his expression calm but resolved, thinking that this time, he will protect them. He trains relentlessly, arcs of swordlight cutting through the air, his cloak snapping with each movement. As the sun sets, beneath the spread of stars, he draws one last clean cut, breath held, and the bell tower's deep toll echoes over the rooftops. The courtyard glows in crimson hues. He continued training like a madman until the nightmarish event came. Inside, the hall windows shimmer with prismatic light. Milo points skyward, exclaiming that the psychedelic gate has appeared. He trembles in awe. Ranson lifts his gaze toward the shifting colors above and thinks with quiet certainty that it has begun. The triangular, prismatic moon hangs crooked in the sky, a shard of stained light spinning slow colors through the night. Below it, creatures that were once trainees lift their heads and roar. Fangs gleam. The air shakes. Ranson lowers his eyes and says nothing. He lets silence sit heavy between his breaths. He thinks about the 2 weeks he spent moving through time, every step meant to stop this moment. He believes most of the trainees who turned into monsters were the ones who underwent the procedure Milo warned him about. He remembers tracing the drugs back to their source and finding nothing wrong. The lack of answers feels deliberate. Behind him, Milo struggles to say his name. Milo's voice breaks as he says his body feels wrong. Ranson's jaw tightens. Sweat slides down his cheek as the truth locks into place. He thinks that the day he tried to erase has returned. Milo's body twists. Dark fur tears through skin, the change crawling up his arms like something alive and hungry. Ranson drops beside him and grips him hard, as if holding him could keep his mind intact. He tells Milo to stay where he is and endure a little longer. A werewolf charges. Ranson rips his sword free. Blue light coils along the blade, tight and sharp. He sets his stance and swings once, clean and merciless. The glowing arc cuts through the rushing shadow. The others don't hesitate. They close in, circling him with snapping jaws and claws scraping the floor. Ranson raises his sword again and thinks that there is no choice left but to fight. He shifts his footing and draws a deeper breath, pulling himself together. The blue aura steadies, then surges. He narrows his eyes and thinks that this time will be different. He believes he can cut them down. He moves. Blue slashes tear across the hall, one after another, carving space out of teeth and fur. A beast lunges for his throat and he twists aside, dragging his blade through its opening. Another snaps at his side and he answers with a rising cut that flashes like lightning. The hall dissolves into chaos. At the same time, Milo is jumped by another beast. It bites down on Milo and refuses to let go. Blood spills across the floor as instinct overwhelms reason. Ranson snaps his head toward the sound and shouts Milo's name. The monsters snarl and regroup, red eyes fixed on him as it lunges. Ranson cuts it down with ease, but it was too late for Milo. The other beast bites down on him while Ranson could only watch from a distance. He recalls Milo saying that he wanted to become a knight. Ranson freezes. That fragile wish hits harder than any claw. His sword lowers as a massive beast leaps toward him, claws wide, jaws open. He thinks that he failed them again. The thought crushes everything else until his mind goes empty. He believes it is happening all over again. A sharp voice screams his name. Yuden charges into view, ponytail whipping behind her as she yells for him to wake up. The beast crashes down on them. Steel flashes as she moves, cutting just enough to survive the impact. Yuden grabs him and shouts that he needs to get a grip. She snaps that if he freezes now, they will both die. Her eyes flick toward the corridor and she urgently points out the exit. Ahead, several monsters crouch along the red carpet like a waiting pack. Yuden tightens her grip on her sword and says each of them is monstrously strong. She exhales and says they need to divide their roles. She reaches for a smaller blade and declares she will go for their necks while he handles their claws. Ranson snaps at her to be quiet, forcing the chaos in his head to collapse into a single, sharp line. She calls his name again as he surges forward, low and fast, sword angled behind him. The pack tenses at the far end of the hall. One red eye gleams as saliva drips from its mouth. Ranson slams his feet into the floor and accelerates, a roar tearing from his chest as he commits fully. A memory resurges, the night sky, deep blue and scattered with stars. On a high ledge near the castle walls. Yuden sits with her knees drawn in, watching the heavens. Ranson asks if she's watching the 13 gods. She reacts with quiet surprise, and immediately asks how he knew. Ranson answers that it sounded exactly like something she would do, and that since she uses the 13 gods to orient herself. He asks if when she looks at the sky like that, she thinks things like protecting this place. She admits that it is true for her, because everything she has come from here. She asks why he shielded her. Ranson replies that if she dies, she cannot protect it. He reminds her that she once described the realm of sword support as the state where the sword moves on its own. He asks whether the sword sometimes moves beyond the wielder's intent. She presses, asking if he doubts his ability to control it. She tells him that once he reaches that realm, such distinctions no longer matter. The sword becomes him, and he becomes the sword. She explains that the blade moving on its own is simply his will taking shape. The memory releases him. Back in the hall, the sword hums in his hand as if it has been waiting. He draws it through the air and a blue arc tears outward. Another swing follows, wider and more violent. A red, swirling tendril surges toward him. Ranson twists and cuts through it, splitting the pressure apart before it can crush him. Dust and fragments scatter across the carpet. He drives forward, blue light coiling around him. Monsters rush from both sides. The fight continues without pause. Bodies tumble aside as he advances. Dust and torn flesh hang in the air. He exhales through clenched teeth, sweat sliding down his face as he stares ahead with hollow focus. Behind him, Yuden chases after him, shouting that he is insane and demanding to know if he wants to die. Ranson does not answer. He tightens his grip and thinks that he saved him. He glances back at her, the thought sharpening into certainty, this time. He snaps that if she has the strength to complain, she should swing again. A werewolf charges. Ranson meets it head on, blue aura flaring as his blade cuts through. Yuden strikes in the same beat, her blow crashing alongside his. The monster collapses beneath the crossing attacks. Ranson's breathing shakes. He thinks that he saved Yuden, and that he killed the monster. He wipes his face and stares at the scattered corpses as distant movement shakes the hall. He wonders if this means success. Yuden suddenly shouts that the werewolves are heading outside. Ranson orders that they follow, and they sprint through the wreckage toward open air. Outside, Ranson stops short as pale columns of strange light rise into the sky. He blurts out the word light, as if naming it might stop it, and then realizes with dread that it is happening again. A pale green hexagon forms above him and declares that history failed to change. Cold runes announce that broken causality will be consumed and time rewound. Green light floods his vision. A rune-covered book opens and flips its own pages as a record resolves into clarity, stating that in the Lucera's calendar, year 4673, on November 23, under clear skies, the Master seized the cultist treasure. The roar of battle is replaced by hoofbeats. He is back to the start. Ranson jolts beneath a travel-worn hood on a rattling cart. His gaze stays hard as the road stretches ahead. He thinks that winning is not enough. A large chest rests nearby, silent and heavy. Ranson watches it and realizes that if guarding the cultist treasure is his task, he must become something beyond victory. He stares at the iron bands and knows that without reaching the realm of sword support, this trial cannot be overcome. He finally speaks beneath the hood, calling for his master, and asks what he must do to reach the realm of sword support. His master sits across from Ranson on the rolling cart and tells him that he is practically forcing the threshold, standing one step, no, half a step, away. Ranson answers that he feels the same tension, as if something is about to give. The road blurs beneath the wheels, and Ranson recalls the banquet. He cuts through werewolves, blue aura tearing through flesh. He thinks that he has to move faster. He drives his blade through a snapping maw, hot breath brushing past his face, and grinding his teeth as he thinks that he has to kill faster. The thought sharpens into a single demand. He thinks faster, but when he tries to make the sword obey, it refuses. Ranson admits that no matter how often he tries to command it, the blade does not answer him. The master tells him that this is exactly why it fails. Ranson reacts at once and asks what he means. The master asks whether Ranson commands his heart to beat. He asks whether Ranson orders his stomach to digest. Ranson answers that he does not. The master then asks why. If that is the case, Ranson insists on commanding his sword. He explains that the sword is not something to dominate, but something to accept. Ranson falls silent, staring ahead as the words settle. His gaze lowers as the explanation carves itself into him. He understands that sword trust is the sword becoming part of him. It is not a command, but a union. It is not a separate realm, only a process, a gradual unification of self and blade. The master tells him that for now, he must not draw his sword. Ranson immediately asks what he is supposed to do instead. The master answers that Ranson should not draw the sword, but allow the sword to draw him, and wait until that moment comes. Ranson starts to object, his hand tightening at his side as he thinks that he does not have time. The cart continues toward the fortress city beneath a bright sky. Ahead, Yuden spots him and stops short, eyes widening. Ranson stands beneath his hood as she approaches, and neither speaks at first. He thinks that the part of her that has not changed is still there, despite everything. Ranson watches her expression and feels an unexpected relief at that realization, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. They arrive before a gathered crowd. The master and Yuden stand together as murmurs ripple behind them. Ranson's hand slides to his sword hilt, and metal whispers as the blade stirs. Ranson draws the sword and raises it, calm and steady, as though answering a call he can finally hear. The master watches in surprise and thinks that he expected Ranson to understand eventually, but not this quickly. Two armed men recoil and shout in alarm, one demanding to know what Ranson is doing, the other raging that this is insolence before the Grand Duke. The master thrusts out his hand and orders them to stop. He remarks that Ranson resembles it. The bearded master lifts one hand with a calm smile, halting the disturbance. Ranson stands cloaked, sword in hand, blue energy coiling along the blade. The master explains that this is the state of becoming one with the sword. He then fixes Ranson with a hard stare and asks what Ranson's true intention is. Ranson thinks that it is Yuden, and this city, that he wants to protect them. Yuden stares at him, confused. The scene shifts to the completion banquet beneath a bright dome and glittering chandeliers. Rich dishes and desserts line the tables, and uniformed knights stand by the doors. Boots cross the polished floor as Yuden says that thanks to him, she was able to attend the banquet wearing proper shoes. She admits that she nearly had to run back and change. He replies that he would have been the one in trouble otherwise. Ranson thinks that staying close to them is the best way to protect them. Yuden asks what that is supposed to mean. Ranson replies that it simply is what it is. Milo teases Yuden about having a clumsy side. Yuden insists that this was a rare exception and that she is usually serious. Green light and drifting script wash over Ranson's vision like turning pages. A record appears, stating that in Lucera's year 4673, on November 21st, at the end of the day, the Master. A warning interrupts, stating that if the works written in the Book of Fate are erased and he returns to the past, only one chance remains. A bell tolls. Through the castle windows, the psychedelic moon rises. Ranson looks up and thinks that he must succeed this time. A sudden roar shatters the hall. Heavy footsteps thunder as werewolves surge inside. Yuden stumbles back, staring at the monsters, and blurts out her disbelief. Ranson grabs her and tells her to listen carefully. He orders that from this moment, she is to lead the knights and evacuate all unarmed trainees. Yuden demands to know what he is saying. She must deal with the monsters first. He continues, stating that he will keep the monsters occupied. Once the evacuation is complete, he orders her to gather all available forces, then look to the south of the city, where she will see a strange light. He commands her to attack that location and destroy the source. Yuden asks if he knows something she does not. Ranson answers that he does, and that she must trust him. He adds that if anyone tries to stop her from destroying that light, she must cut them down without hesitation. Blue aura tears from Ranson's sword as he cuts through the rushing dark, his coat snapping with the force of the swing. His eyes stay sharp as he advances, barely aware of the werewolf surging up behind him. Then he realizes the sword is already moving. The blade snaps through the air faster than his body can follow. Ranson understands that he is no longer directing it. The sword is leading him. Another monster lunges, but the blade arrives first. The world narrows into a single, precise line. Information floods his senses, far beyond anything he felt before. Openings unfold everywhere, dozens of them, clear and unavoidable. Ranson tightens his expression and recognizes it as the realm of sword insight. Werewolves pour into the hall. Ranson plants his feet, lowers his stance, and grips the hilt with both hands. Blue slashes erupt in rapid succession, crossing the space like a net. Bodies fall before their leaps finish. Blood stains the red carpet as the last movement dies beneath the ringing steel. He thinks that this time, none of them escaped. Ranson exhales as tension drains from his shoulders and believes it is over. In the corner, Milo's transformed body crouches against the wall, shaking, claws digging into his own head. Ranson rushes over and kneels, keeping himself calm and low. He tells Milo to hold on, insisting that there must be a way to turn him back, and says that he is doing well by enduring. Milo growls and calls him Sir Ranson, saying that it is not like that. His jaw trembles, and tears slip through the fur. Ranson snaps that Milo should not say such weak things. He insists that skilled mages are nearby and that a solution will be found. Milo claws at his face and apologizes again, calling him Sir Ranson. He says that he knows this cannot be undone. His voice breaks as he adds that he wants to die as a human, tears spilling as his eye squeezes shut. Pain hardens Ranson's face as Milo digs his claws into his own neck. Milo collapses into the ground and blood-red tendrils lashes out from his back, thick cords snapping upward. Ranson bares his teeth and drives his sword down, cutting until the writhing mass collapses. He looks down and says that Milo has suffered enough. He thinks that if Milo is reborn 10,000 years from now, he should come join his family and he will treat him well. Ranson sheathes his sword and runs. Outside, the city lies dark. He sees no strange light and realizes that Yuden succeeded. Footsteps thunder closer. Yuden sprints toward him, shouting his name and calling him Junior, panic in her voice. She says that the Fat Master broke the heretic's chains. She remarks that the moment the Fat Master fell, the strange light vanished. Weakened werewolves stagger as their strength drains away. Yuden announces that they lost their power. Ranson forces a tired smile and tells her that she did well. The praise startles her. She turns to look for him, calling his name, but he has already slipped through time. When he emerges back in the future, he presses a hand to his chest, thinking that he wanted her to hear it, and keeps moving. He surveys the ruined streets and identifies the area as Central Kushan City, noting the destruction without surprise. He runs along a wall, drops into a crouch, and fixes his gaze on Pietro Baroni Castle. He reasons that his siblings were not at the Lenin estate, and that Ribera likely brought them here because she knew C. He believes they should be safe, but decides he must see them himself. A sharp command orders him to stop. Amber power coils around his neck and shoulder like a leash. Ranson freezes and judges the pressure, realizing the attacker is top tier. He twists free in a single motion, redirects the blade, and breaks her stance. The attacker's face comes into view. Orange hair, blazing eyes. Ranson recognizes her and says Katrina's name. Katrina freezes, then erupts, calling him Oppa and insisting it is really him. She grabs at him, overwhelmed and unable to believe he is back. Ranson asks when she returned. Katrina answers that it was 2 days ago and explains that C warned them after the Kaisia's attack and told them to return. She then shouts for everyone to come out. Windows and doors open as she announces that Ranson is back. Bursun appears grinning. Others crowd behind him. Daisy freezes in shock at the name. Ranson lifts a hand in greeting as the noise swells. He feels it finally sink in that he has returned home. The warmth fades quickly. They gather around a table under lamplight, faces tense. Ranson says he will get straight to the point. C explains that in the week since Kaisia's fell and Ranson vanished, Ashley devoured half of Kushan City. Ranson stiffens, repeats the name, and identifies Ashley as a former bandit leader. He demands how that could have happened. C admits that she was shocked as well, and says that before long, Ashley nearly devoured them too. C continues, explaining that Ashley did not stop at expansion and openly applied pressure. Ranson asks what kind of pressure she means. C hesitates, falling silent for a moment, and Daisy finally admits that Ashley wants to marry her. A stunned reaction escapes Ranson as he stares at her, momentarily convinced his hearing failed him. He thinks that what he just heard makes no sense at all. Around the table, everyone freezes. Ranson rubs the back of his head, repeating the thought to himself in disbelief, wondering if Ashley really intends to do that. C regains her composure and explains that roughly 3 days after Ranson disappeared, Ashley was the first to move. She says that Ashley recruited the territorial army, formed alliances with the most unsavory noble families, and even pulled in previously neutral factions. She adds that he absorbed Cassius's elite troops, known as the Red Warrior Corps. She finishes by stating that in just 7 days, Ashley seized control of nearly half of the city's military power and even hired the Koleschic Brotherhood. Ranson replies that he understands. He thinks that an overwhelming amount happened while he was gone and realizes that if he had returned any later, they would have been overwhelmed. Daisy calls him brother and tells him to calm down, but Ranson leans forward and says that he is already calm and thinking clearly. He insists that he is serious and asks where he needs to go to kill Ashley. He corrects himself, saying that he means he should speak with Ashley directly. She explains that the Kushan City Joint Conference will be held the next day, a gathering where all armed factions meet to discuss governance rights, and she says that Ashley will attend. Ranson replies that this works perfectly and says that he can clean out Ashley and the rest of the trash there. C immediately tells him that he cannot do that. She explains that maintaining order in a city like Kushan requires a certain amount of armed power, whether they like it or not. She places a book on the table and explains that it is the kill list. Ranson opens it and scans the densely packed names. She notes that names written in blue belong to factions with some sense of decency, black marks those beyond redemption, and red sits between the two. He remarks that even those in red survive on drugs and loan sharking. Still, he acknowledges that the red factions must be tolerated to keep the city stable. He asks if that means Ashley is also marked red. The room falls silent. Ranson's eyes narrow, sharp and cold. C confirms that everyone listed will gather at the conference the next day. Ranson closes the book and says that is enough, adding that they will proceed accordingly. By morning, the city's ruins stretch beneath an open sky. Broken walls and collapsed buildings cast long shadows as armed figures converge toward a single location. Someone points and shouts in disbelief, spreading word that Ranson is alive. Faces resolve in the crowd. Escorting Ranson are Katrina Egan of the Lennon family, Baron Doronia of the same house. Ashley turns fully, eyes widening, and identifies Ranson aloud. He steps forward with visible relief, saying that Ranson truly returned and that he is glad he is safe, extending his hand as onlookers stir at the sight of him. Ashley smiles broadly and offers his hand. Ranson faces him without expression and offers no response. Ashley asks whether Daisy is absent. Ranson asks why Ashley brings her up. Ashley replies that he favors women with strong pride. Ranson's gaze hardens as he thinks that Ashley is unhinged. Ashley asks whether Ranson heard about the proposal and says that he hopes Ranson will view it favorably. He adds that becoming family would not be a bad arrangement for the new count. Ranson repeats the phrase and asks what Ashley means by new count. Ashley answers that Ranson naturally holds that position and says no one present would deny it. Ashley continues smiling as he adds that even a count cannot ignore his faction, since half the city already belongs to him. Ranson responds that he heard there was trouble while he was gone. He opens the kill list and begins reading names aloud. He declares their crimes and delivers sentences, pronouncing execution without hesitation. Ranson names the Karu family. He reads the charge of an entire household slaughtered and robbed. Ranson calls Katrina's name. She steps forward, asks to handle it herself, and carries out the execution in a single clean strike. Shock ripples through the square as voices rise, calling the scene madness, unable to comprehend the speed of judgment. Ashley watches with a strained smile and comments that the new count is terrifying. He adds that this kind of forceful opening is fitting for a ruler. Ranson does not slow. He continues reading, continues judging, continues sentencing. The Lordran family is condemned and executed. The Harem family follows. Then the Dasbiker family. Then the Lucas family. Each name is spoken by Ranson first, each death carried out immediately after. Ashley forces a laugh and addresses him as Count, saying that everyone has received the message by now. He warns that pushing too hard might cause backlash and suggests stepping in. Ranson ignores him and continues forward. Ashley's eye twitches as sweat runs down his face. He says that he kept himself in check and addresses Ranson as the new count. He steps forward and insists that the real problem lies with those men, claiming that none of it has anything to do with him. One of Ashley's followers shouts back in protest, arguing that Ashley is suddenly drawing a line between them. He says they all fed from the same trough and accuses Ashley of acting superior despite taking the dirtiest share himself. Ranson lowers his gaze. A cold, blue pressure swells around him. In the next instant, he moves. Blue aura snaps through the air, and Ashley barely managed to block with his swords. Ashley's eyes widen, and he demands to know what this is supposed to mean. Ranson responds by calmly listing the charges. He states that there are 3 illegal drug factories and 12 forced prostitution brothels. He then says Ashley's name and declares the sentence as death. Ashley staggers, and someone screams in panic for the Crimson Warriors to appear. Red armored soldiers surge forward. Ashley shouts that this can still be stopped and calls the situation reckless bravado. He yells Ranson's name again, warning that if this continues, they will all be destroyed together. Ranson's sword does not pause. Another blue arc explodes outward, and Ashley is struck hard enough to sever his head from his body. The crowd recoils. A man forces his way forward, calling Ranson a great warrior and asking if they really must fight to the bitter end. Ranson cuts him off and tells Uncle Uxala to make a choice whether they are retreating or coming for him. Uxala's expression tightens. He answers that it is arrogance to believe someone can kill whoever they dislike and still survive in this city, or anywhere in Roberland. He asks how clean Ranson believes himself to be to speak that way. Ranson says that cleanliness is not the issue at all. Images flash through Ranson's mind. Families torn apart, a child screaming for his mother, homes destroyed, more orphans abandoned to the streets. He decides there is no point saying anything further. Ranson steps forward and strikes. Blue light tears beside Uxala, cutting down 2 men in half. Uxala screams in outrage, demanding to know what the rest are doing and shouting that he intends to kill everyone if they don't fight back. That if they do not unite now, they will all die. Fighters grit their teeth and draw their weapons. Ranson turns his blade toward them and says that they are right. He says that he will kill everyone, so they should all come at him. They charge. Ranson remains low and steady as blue aura erupts again, forming a lattice of cuts. The first attackers are shredded mid-charge. Uxala swings wildly and curses him, but Ranson's next arc arrives first, severing him and sending the body flying. The crowd falters, voices shaking as they call it madness. Someone finally understands what they are witnessing and trembles as he names it the level of a Grand Master. Ranson straightens and asks what comes next. He asks whether these men are the ones Ashley hired. A group steps forward, identified as the Calceric Brotherhood. Ranson turns to face them. One of them drops to his knees and begs for mercy. Ranson's expression tightens into an awkward twitch as he thinks that he is not skilled at handling this kind of turn. He studies them and decides that they are not truly vile, noting that they are among the few left in Roberland who still understand a sense of romance. Ranson orders them to kneel off to the side and raise their hands. They comply without resistance, lining up with arms lifted. He mutters that there should be about 70 of them remaining. Ranson says that they should finish this. Ranson cuts them down one by one like tofu. One man glances at Ranson's silhouette and says that no one can win against that, then screams for everyone to run. From above, the air whistles. A volley of arrows rains down, piercing the fleeing men and dropping them where they run. Archers on the rooftops continue firing, their leader shouting that none are to escape. One survivor stumbles, looks up in terror, and Katrina steps into view with a sharp grin, announcing that they are here as well.